is Southern Fried Sports with BamaOnline senior analyst Travis Reier on your home for Alabama sports. Tide 100.9 and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app.
It is 11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Time once again for Southern Fried Sports on your home for University of Alabama Athletics. Tide 100.9 FM, your home for University of Alabama Athletics. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, with you each and every weekday morning from 11 a.m. until noon. The show, as always, brought to you by Peterbrook Chocolatier out there at 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. Perhaps you have heard the latest announcement, proclamation to come from Montgomery in terms of food service and the like in relation to this ongoing pandemic known as the coronavirus, COVID-19. Peterbrook does have that curbside service available to you. Give them a call at 205-752-0211. You can place your order over the phone. They will bring your purchases out to you outside the store there at 1530 McFarland Boulevard North. Set up to handle you that way if you still need your chocolate fix. Joined as always on the program by Josh Smith, executive producer of the show, who together we combine to form the 60-minute man of Sports Talk Radio. Josh, you hanging in there on this Tuesday?
Hey, it's definitely a different kind of St. Patrick's Day. I don't know if we want to call it just a quarantine St. Patrick's Day or what's going on with it, but it's definitely going to be different with the social distancing going on. But so far, it's been a great day and just kind of ready to get that drink on later on in the day.
Yeah, it definitely is. And our playlist theme of the day, by the way, today is Irish band. So you're going to get a little Cranberries. You're going to get a little Boomtown Rats. We had U2 last week because it was Adam Clayton, the bassist's birthday. I think it was last Friday. So we got some recency bias against U2, but we will have some Thin Lizzy for you. Absolutely. Some Thin Lizzy from the great 1970s, even into the 80s a little bit there before that one unfortunately came to a close. 205-342-9904. That is the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio line. If you'd like to jump on board with us, you can do that right now. Obviously, we're going to do our very best and continue to do our very best here at Tide and our other Town Square media outlets to keep you as up to date on the coronavirus situation as we possibly can. First and foremost, that's our service to you right now, the listener out there. But we're certainly still going to talk a lot about sports. That's our service to you as well here on the station and the programs that make up Tide 100.9 FM. And we have some news. Unfortunately, it continues to be largely related to the coronavirus. And just saw this a few moments ago. The ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, just announced that all athletic-related activities through the end of the 2019-2020 academic year have been canceled. It's a wrap for the ACC, which you kind of anticipate coming for the other Power 5 leagues, but the ACC going ahead and making it official. All athletic-related activities in the conference through the end of this academic year have been canceled. Wow. Gets a little more surreal, it seems like, by the day, doesn't it? I'll tell you one league that hadn't slowed down one iota is the National Football League. And look, the National Football League got some blowback when it essentially let everyone know that, in terms of how we conduct our business with free agency coming up, even the draft is still on. It's obviously going to be adjusted in a way in which it's going to be nothing like what we're used to from a fan perspective with the NFL draft. But the day-to-day business of the National Football League caught a little blowback for that. But I think a lot of folks are pretty thankful that the NFL has maintained something close to status quo, because if not for the NFL and the sports world right now, what would the news situation be like? But you got plenty of news from the National Football League here in the last 48 hours or so, right? Just this morning, we learned that Tom Brady's tenure, his era, is over as a New England Patriot. Tom Brady what a rough St. Patrick's Day for Boston, man. Biggest day of the year for Boston. Chicago, too. Butte, Montana. I was supposed to be celebrating St. Patrick's Day today in Butte, Montana, which per capita has more Irish descendants than any other area of the United States of America. Woo! But Boston, man, Boston hammered on this St. Patrick's Day with Tom moving on. We'll see where he goes. Going to be fascinating. This guy threw for nearly 75,000 yards. Just say that. 74,571 passing yards for Tom Brady. 6 world titles. 541 touchdown passes with the Patriots. Obviously, both those totals rank as the most in for a player in a team history. I think that was pretty easy to figure out. But Tom Brady going to be a Tampa Bay Buck. Tom Brady going to be an LA Charger. I think the brand of Tom Brady certainly fits with the LA market. I think we would all agree on that. Iconic status, major global market, not just in the United States, but globally when you're talking about LA. When you're talking about personnel fit and a place where I think he would more seamlessly transition with the people around him, probably the Chargers. But when you think about the pairing potentially of Tom Brady and Bruce Arians, that piques your interest a pretty good bit. And you got Mike Evans at the wide receiver position down there in Tampa Bay. And it's TB. It's Tampa Bay and TB Tom Brady. I mean, it makes a lot of sense on a variety of levels, right? Even when you talk about the marketing perspective of this thing. So the Tom Brady era in Foxborough comes to an end. Now, a lot of news here in the last day or so involving former Alabama players and the business being conducted in the National Football League. Amari Cooper, new deal with the Dallas Cowboys, 5 years, $100 million. I still haven't seen the guaranteed money on that. And as you know, I'm always more interested in the guaranteed money because that's what you're going to get. That's what you're going to get. In the NFL, a lot of the numbers are funny like that. You know, they're huge numbers. But all that really matters in the NFL is what's guaranteed. What are you getting upon signing a lot of times? So, but still, big money for Amari Cooper, who, according to Adam Schefter of ESPN, actually took less money to stay with the Dallas Cowboys. And now the Cowboys find themselves in a position similar to the Tennessee Titans with Derrick Henry in that didn't get the long-term deal done with Dak Prescott. Same for the Tennessee Titans, as both of these teams slapped the franchise tag on their preeminent players. And so we'll see how that goes. Yeah, we're hearing now from Josh that $60 million guaranteed for Amari Cooper per Ian Rappaport of NFL.com, the NFL Network. So that'll work. That's a nice chunk of change. You know, that'll spend well even down in South Florida, you know, where Amari hails from. But when you're looking at these deals, Amari gets paid, Ryan Tannehill gets paid. What about Dak Prescott, big picture wise with the Cowboys? I still think, you know, Dak's going to be a Cowboy long term. I think what Amari's situation sort of underscores is this continued desire for athletes, for football players to be Dallas Cowboys, man. That blue star, you want to talk about brands in sports? I mean, obviously you can put it up there with the Yankees, and you can put it up there, you know, with the biggest entities in professional sports around the world. And it still has that attraction, man. 25 years, it's been a quarter century since the Dallas Cowboys won a Super Bowl. I mean, that's what we're looking at. A lifetime. Essentially, in the lifetimes of people like Amari Cooper and Tua Tagovailoa, the Dallas Cowboys have not won a world title. Doesn't matter. You heard Tua a couple weeks ago. If he could pick, or if he had a favorite team, who did he say? Who did Tua say?
It's in America's team.
Dallas Cowboys, baby.
Dallas Not just Cowboys. For the cheerleaders.
No. But that brand, dude. And it's one of the few situations in pro sports now where I think you'll see guys take a discount, you know, offer a discount to the team to remain a part of the situation. And Dak's got to consider that. He's got to consider that in his big picture compensation package, because whereas he might be able to go somewhere like Tampa or Jacksonville or Carolina and get a few more bucks on his salary and on his guaranteed money, you're going to attract the sort of national endorsement deals in those places like he's able to attract in Dallas, being a Cowboy. You got to add all that up, man. That's all got to go in the same pot when you make those type of considerations as far as, what your next stop is going to entail. So we'll see with Derrick Henry. The sensible play was the one that played out in Tennessee. I know it sounds crazy with Ryan Tannehill getting the deal he got. He got more guaranteed money. Here's what's crazy. Ryan Tannehill is getting more guaranteed money than Amari Cooper.
What?
If that tells you the value of the quarterback position, if you didn't already know, which I think you did, Ryan Tannehill's getting more guaranteed money than Amari Cooper. That just sounds nuts, doesn't it? But that's the way it's going to play out. And really, the Titans, based on the cards they had to play with, they played their hand the way they needed to play it. They hit Derrick Henry with the franchise tag. I guess there's the potential for a deal to still get done, but there are restrictions that these teams do have to deal with, like the salary cap. The numbers have to work. There are restrictions in place, safeguards to sort of keep certain franchises and markets from just totally dominating in terms of personnel acquisition. So I don't know exactly what the Titans salary cap situation is, but it's still a nice payday with the franchise tag for Derrick Henry. But in comparison to some of these other guys, he's looking at 50% less for 2020 than, say, a guy like Todd Gurley, or 70% less in some instances. So it's in excess of $10 million for the season that Derrick Henry is looking at for 2020, and that's certainly no money to sneeze at. But in comparison to other players at his position for the upcoming season, it's pretty mediocre. 205-342-9904. That is the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio line if you'd like to jump on board with us on this Tuesday morning. We're going to talk with Brent Beaird coming up next on the show. We're going to get into some future schedules from a neutral site perspective, the impact of this situation continuing to have, what some mile markers that are coming up, some things that we don't talk about a whole lot that are likely to be impacted by this, how the condensed nature of the college sports year could be incredibly tight as we get into the summer months and then start to look ahead to August, September, in the final sort of third of the 2020 year. So we'll talk with Brent about that stuff, and then we'll continue to get into some of the off-season news as best we can. The transfer portal doesn't slow down, and coaching news doesn't seem to slow down where college basketball is concerned. You saw the city of Birmingham has basically turned over at the Division I level on the men's side, with UAB and Samford undergoing changes. Some talk about Bucky McMillan, head coach of Mountain Brook boys program, being a candidate for that Samford job over there in Homewood. So we'll see how that plays out. But transfer portal, I think with Alabama, Nate Oates, you're going to continue to see the transfer portal be an outlet, a source that Oates and his staff continue to explore quite heavily. I think really on multiple levels, you're going to see Alabama men's basketball under Nate Oates continue to acquire talent. Got a little bit of a preview with that just in his first run through the recruiting process a year ago, where you saw Nate Oates go to the prep level. You saw Nate Oates go to the junior college level. You saw Nate Oates mine the grad transfer, the transfer route. I think that's going to be a continuation. I think that's the case for a lot of programs out there these days. Going to step aside to our first break. When we come back, Brent Beaird will join us here on the program on Tide 100.9 FM. It is Southern Fried Sports presented by Peterbrook Chocolatier. More of the show right after this. And we're back with more of a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 100.9 FM. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, with you each and every weekday morning from 11 p.m. until noon. It is a Tuesday, so we're going to head down to Northeast Florida, check in with our good friend Beard of College Sports Today and Coast News. And Brent, I'm sure you've been asked a lot of the same I've been asked here in the last couple of days, and it's still the reality of the situation in our sports world and closer to home with the Southeastern Conference and the cancellations of the big dances for both the men and the women, and spring sports very much in peril at this point. Spring football games very much in peril at this point. It seems like there's still people I talk to, even within this industry, that haven't quite wrapped their arms around the situation at hand. It's still a process of trying to let it all sink in, it seems like.
Listen, it's an hour by hour, day by day thing, isn't it, Travis? I mean, we all would love to know all this stuff is going to work its way through very soon, and we'll be up and going. And listen, I've talked to a lot of guys like you have. It is a struggle right now to do sports radio and television. I know down here we're very limited in what we can do with television with First Coast News, because Trav, the reality is there's just nothing really going on right now except this NFL off-season stuff. I mean, we enjoy speculating and can guess and the things like that, but it just is. All we can do is take this thing a day at a time right now.
That's it. And I know the NFL, as we've talked about, drew a little bit of the ire of the social media world for continuing on about its business in the off season without really slowing down much. But I think there's a lot of folks thankful that there's been Tom Brady news here in the last little bit, that there's been free agency news, certainly involving a lot of former Alabama players here in the last 24 hours or so, that have at least provided us with a diversion, a distraction away from this very real situation that we're still trying to deal with on a global basis. Now, as far as how it's already impacting the Southeastern Conference, we already know from a basketball perspective what has happened. We already are anticipating what it's going to mean for spring sports. But spring football, a big part of that as well. And I see where LSU has gone ahead and made the decision to outright cancel its spring game, which it was already going to play off campus,
right,
I believe, at Southern University. So there's dominoes falling in that regard too, I guess. And I know Alabama fans and college football fans around the Southeast are sort of anticipating others to fall in due time.
There is I don't know if it's a deadline, but I think you just a suggested date by the conference of April the 15th of May, and I think that's maybe more if things are better at that point. Can they try to put in some kind of a spring? The discussion that we've had, as much as anything else, is number one, and Trav, you know these coaches are creatures of habit, and they don't like to get off of their schedule. So I think the two things that have come up would be, and again, this is our friend speculation here, but on April the 15th, if they could go for 2 weeks or 3 at the most, would they do that, or would that be so much off of their schedule, especially if they can begin recruiting again, that they would not do that? Or, Trav, would they just say, we're not going to do anything in the spring, we'll go with their schedule for May, June, July, and then when it comes to fall camp, maybe start a week or two early on that end of it. So I'm curious your take on that. My thought would be they would do the earlier camp more than they may do something at the mid or late or early April, May type juncture.
Yeah, it's the entire calendar year that's being thrown into flux with all this. And it's not just team-related activities like spring practice. It is the May evaluation period from a recruiting perspective. You have camp season that's a part of the recruiting process now in the summer months. That's a big part of what Alabama does in terms of the evaluation process. is getting these prospects on campus. Some of them have offers contingent upon their appearance and their participation at summer camps. So there are so many things that are in play that people don't even talk about. You've got SEC spring meetings that you got to consider that are supposed to take place in late May or in May. And then you get into things like summer enrollees that are supposed to show up around the 1st of June, summer workouts. What about SEC media days right now at this point? How can you look at July 12th or so right now and think, oh, that's going to go on unimpeded in Atlanta? I mean, it could be that we have sort of a virtual reality version of SEC media days.
Yeah.
Where there's no media. It's media days, but it's just somehow, some way, it's content provided through the individual universities. It could end up being a virtual sort of retro look at the old Skyriders tour that they used to do back in the day, where they'd all get on a plane and visit the different campuses on a daily basis, or in a lot of one shot. So there's just so much to consider out there right now. So many uncertainties that it's hard to really talk about in definitive terms. And so, when you look at it as far as big picture wise and the potential for the calendar year for college football specifically to be at least altered somewhat, you start to wonder about the potential drop in quality of play and player safety as a result of that. I mean, these are all things that we have to take into consideration when we look ahead.
Well, Trav, and people already raised a question. I think it's a good one. Is the way we're going now? How good a play are we going to be getting in September? I mean, it may be a while before these guys. Well, I mean, I think they're smart enough to where they'll be somewhat in shape. But again, Trav, and I think it's legitimate. Is you've got questions like, say, a Georgia with a Jamie Newman who's coming in, and how they've got a new OC, and Todd Monken, and some of these other guys who are changing their scheme altogether. Trav, not having a spring and maybe even a shortened, if they do that, fall practice, that's going to be tough for some of these folks, aren't it?
It is, and there's other places where competitions have to be played out. And whereas you've got student athletes that won't come right out and admit it, a lot of their big picture future plans were contingent upon competitions this spring. In other words, more movement potentially that was going to come down. Just looking at quarterback situations here in Tuscaloosa and in other places, that there was going to be fallout from those competitions and certainly into fall camp. So all of that gets pushed back perhaps. And so it becomes a very, very crowded time in a very, very small window potentially when you talk about trying to condense a lot of this into a 5-6 week type of situation perhaps down the road. Talking with Brent Beaird of College Sports Today and First Coast News on a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports presented by Peterbrook Chocolatier. Let's talk about some things that are out there, hopefully, for us. And, the neutral site topic, Brent, it's still a very interesting one because we've seen this movement of late going back to home and homes. But when I look at the schedule for 2020 and 2021 that you forward me here, there's still plenty of those neutral site games coming down the pike. And, Alabama, as has been the case since really 2007 or so, going to be a central figure in a lot of those.
No doubt. Bama playing Southern Cal in 2020, and then a very interesting game with Miami and my Stars. Trav, who knows who the Miami coach might be next year when they're
still be Ed Reed.
Really?
That transition's already in place. It's already going down,
Yeah, and listen, they may make that announcement, Trav, in October, November of this year with that point. I think what's also interesting is and people may miss the date on this, but Trav, that North Carolina-Auburn game in Mercedes being 5 days after Virginia, Georgia. So pretty safe to say the workers in Mercedes-Benz. And then you've got your situation with West Virginia, Florida State. Now that's a good point. You still got on the future schedules, I think, more home and home, but still a lot of these neutral sites are playing out over the next 2 or 3 years, aren't they?
Mercedes-Benz Stadium in a 7-day span in September. 3 games: West Virginia, Florida State, Virginia, Georgia, if I'm looking at this correctly, and North Carolina, Auburn in a 1-week span at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So when you talk about Power 5 type matchups in the neutral site arena, it's really mostly going to take place there in Atlanta, Georgia. Obviously, Southern California and Alabama out in Arlington, Texas. But Baylor Ole Miss will be an interesting game at Energy Stadium. We hope in Houston, Texas, and we know Notre Dame making the. I guess it's a neutral site game. Notre Dame playing in Dublin. I don't know if that's all that neutral, but really. Notre Dame and Navy on August the 29th. And then you look ahead to 2021 and laying out quite nicely from the neutral site perspective, especially with the recent news that Georgia and Clemson are going to get it together there in Charlotte.
No doubt. And Trev, interesting again. I know a lot of this was done before Lane was in place, but it also plays out well, does it not, for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss playing Baylor in 2020 and then playing Louisville on Labor Day weekend in 2021. That gives them a good bit of publicity toward that end too. In your week 0 game, as you mentioned, in 2020, Notre Dame and Navy, and then Nebraska and Illinois at that point, no doubt. Cornhusker fans hoping Scott Foster will have turned that thing around a little bit better during that time too. So no doubt. And again, another reason we mentioned the 2020, and this is all speculation too, is Trev, if this holds out, they moved that Kentucky Derby to that first Saturday, Labor Day weekend, and then going against college football. I don't think those folks are very envious of having that weekend. I'm not sure they thought that one through real well.
Well, it's just, again, indicative of how crowded the sports calendar might become over a period of about 4 or 5 months in the second half of 2020, if in fact we get to a point where we can pull that off at this point. And you talked about transfer quarterbacks and how they're impacted in all this. Jamie Newman fully expecting to come into the Georgia situation from Wake Forest, jump right in there this spring and sort of establish him as the clear-cut starter. That's not happening now. You got De'Aaron King going from Houston to Miami. Right here in the SEC West, KJ Costello, who potentially could have a huge year in Mike Leach's offense in 2020. That's a situation that we were interested in. Felipe Franks going from Florida to Arkansas. Jake Bentley going from South Carolina to Utah. Chase Bryce going from Clemson to Duke. So I think you could just look at the quarterback situations with these transfers, and it hits you even more so that, man, this is a lot to sort of figure out and play out in an ever-changing time frame, it seems like.
Well, and also to dovetail with that, Matt Corral or Plumlee at Ole Miss, and how that might go. And Trev, how about even further complicated, a guy like Mike Norvell who lands at Florida State, and they're just basically starting over from scratch in some ways. Now, obviously they got some starters back, but he's trying to get his situation going with that early game with West Virginia and Neil Brown, who used to be at Troy. That could be an interesting situation there, and certainly in Neil Brown's best interest that he's got a year ahead of Norvell right now. So, the questions are just amazing. And listen, Trav, imagine trying to put together a preseason college football magazine and not even having a spring to go on. Speaking of speculation, that would get the point of being ridiculous after a while, would it not?
It really would. I guess if there's one thing that's comforting to some of these SEC football coaches is that even with a year largely involving transition at the quarterback position, I did a piece for BamaOnline on Monday looking at the top opposing wide receivers for Alabama's 2020 schedule, and there is some really nice depth in the league, even with Jerry Jeudy moving on, Henry Ruggs III moving on, Justin Jefferson moving on. It's a better looking group, at least in terms of what Alabama's going to see with Seth Williams of Auburn, with George Pickens of Georgia coming in here on September the 19th, Amon-Ra St. Brown of Southern California, Terrace Marshall Jr., Jamar Chase, both those guys of LSU. And that's before we get into some of what Texas A&M returns with Jamon Osborne and some other guys on this Alabama schedule. No shortage of playmakers on the outside, even with a good bit of turnover at the position, Brent.
And I would throw in there, and again, I still think Georgia probably wins the division, but let's just say, Trav, they don't, and it's Florida, and you get, and look, you can throw in not only these wide receivers, but you can throw in some of these tight ends, like a Kyle Pitts at Florida. Trav, that to me is probably more receiver than he is tight end. He last year, by the way, he was 235. We found out this week he's 246. So he's quite a real weapon for them. And you throw some of the better tight ends into the league, and that Bama be facing, and that makes it even more difficult.
And even with the turnover, the potential to see some really good quarterbacks is there. And I think, you can start with Keaton Slovis of Southern California right out the gate, who I would probably have as the top opposing quarterback on Alabama's 2020 regular season schedule. Bo Nix coming back off of SEC Freshman of the Year campaign. Talked about Newman and what's expected of him at Georgia, and we've talked about Miles Brennan and how LSU has absolutely stood pat on Miles Brennan being their guy as a fourth-year junior.
Well, and I think, Trav, whoever is a quarterback at the Mississippi schools, they've got coaches who do well in developing quarterbacks, especially one Mike Leach. So regardless of who that's going to be on that day, that's going to be a big test for the Bama secondary.
Yeah, to be sure, KJ Costello, if he's healthy, this isn't Tommy Stevens redo coming in there. No. This is a dude that, had he stayed healthy at Stanford, not had the concussion and thumb issues that he had a year ago, he's probably in this NFL draft class this year, but the injury set him back. He made the decision to move on. He's a two-time team captain at Stanford, so the intangibles aren't really in question either there. So, yeah, I like what Leach is able to do potentially at quarterback for 2020. If I'm a Mississippi State fan, from a couple different angles, Brent, in that I've got a ready-made guy coming in to take care of that thing, and then it gives me extra time to evaluate Garrett Schrader and bring him along, perhaps something that Joe Moorhead didn't really have the luxury of after Stevens was injured early in the 2019 season.
And Trav, SEC fans really haven't seen Costello yet, and I may be off with this a little bit, but Trav, Costello was like 6'4", 6'5", and like 240, something like that. So this is a big kid who can tuck and run when he needs to also. Here's
the concern, though. You're going to have to protect him better You're going to have more
absolutely.
protection concerns in this league than you had protecting him in the Pac-12.
No question.
And do you have some weapons at Mississippi State to put around this guy? And I understand, Leach is the quarterback whisperer. He's the air raid offensive guru, but you can hide more things talent-wise, deficiency-wise in the Pac-12 than you can in the SEC West.
Sure you can.
You can design it up all day long. If you don't have the dudes to protect a guy that's 6'5", 230, more of a pure pocket guy, and you don't have legitimate weapons on the outside. Now, bringing back Kylan Hill at running back, that's huge for Mississippi State. But you got to have more than that if you're going to really maximize the potential and talent of KJ Costello in 2020 over in Starkville. Brent, I don't know if I'm missing anything else, but we'll wrap it up with that if you think we're good here.
Trav, let me throw this out because this has become some discussion down here, and I know you have been to Army Navy, but there has been talk about Orlando really going all out to get an Army Navy game. Now, obviously here in Jacksonville, with the naval presence, that would seem like that it would be a no-brainer. But I know they've tried to keep it within that triangle, and help me on this, of the Philadelphia, Maryland, Baltimore, maybe even New Jersey type situation. So as you can imagine down here, that's brought us a little bit of discussion on whether they could get it down here for 4 years. So
yeah, I think weather-wise, when you talk about when that game's played, and it's usually played the Saturday after the conference championship games, boy, I think you would definitely be looking at an upgrade in Orlando or Jacksonville. I'm with you. Knowing Jacksonville like we do, we understand the military presence there is massive. We understand Pops is a big Army fan, so it'd be nice for him to have the game in his own backyard. But, it just feels like, though, that Army Navy is meant to be played in less than ideal conditions outdoors.
Right.
So where I think the fan bases would certainly appreciate a change to the state of Florida. I don't know. I've been to some of these Army Navy games when it's 15 degrees, and it's pretty miserable, but it also seemed to add to the sort of mystique when a couple of triple option teams especially get together in maybe the snow or the frigid conditions. We'll see how that plays out. That is interesting, though.
Yeah, it is.
We'll definitely keep an eye on it for sure.
And Trav, one last thing. We need to keep our eye also on Trey Sermon, the Oklahoma running back. I tell you this, now he's transferring from Oklahoma, 2,000 career rushing yards. Listen, this kid's a good running back. He's from the state of Georgia. I think he will have quite a few schools after him. So he's got a lot more tread left on the tires. He could be a really important addition for some school.
Yeah, you put him at a place like Georgia Tech that is
absolutely
maybe transitioning. I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, they're transitioning away from triple option to the pro style, more of the spread and zone read game. That could be a spot. So South Carolina, maybe some other programs in the region. Who knows? We'll see how that plays out with Trey Sermon. I'm with you. This is a guy who can play at a lot of places. Hey, Brent, as always, appreciate the time. Wash your hands. Stay sanitized. And we'll catch up with you again next week.
Trav, as I go, will Pops have a coronavirus tutorial maybe like he did for filling that some of the fluids in the car? I look forward to that one.
Yeah, he's something else, boy. Ooh, he is definitely your doomsday go-to guy.
I bet he is.
Do it. Oh, my goodness. Thanks a lot, Brent. We'll do it next week.
My pleasure, pal. Take care.
There he goes, Brent Beaird on a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports. More of the show right here on Tide 100.9 FM.
With BamaOnline.com senior analyst Travis Reier on your home for Alabama sports. Tide 100.9 and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app.
100.9 FM, Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com with you each and every weekday morning from 11 a.m. until noon. The show, as always, brought to you by Peterbrook Chocolatier. Thanks again to Brent Beaird of college sports today and First Coast News. Join us going around the myriad of topics, more so on the collegiate level in relation to this COVID-19 epidemic and the seemingly minute-to-minute changes it brings about to our lives in general. Certainly valuing the big picture in all of this, trying to do the right things. I know each and every one of you out there are in that situation yourself, but been some business as usual on the sports front today, especially with the NFL free agency and some of the trickle down effect or move up that we're seeing with quarterbacks. Obviously, Tom Brady dominating headlines this morning as he announces via social media that he is done as a New England Patriot. Most of the focus moving forward on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the Los Angeles Chargers for Tom Brady. We'll see. Never know. Could be that mystery team lurking in the darkness there that emerges, and we'll see how that plays out for the future Hall of Famer Tom Brady. News out of Charlotte that it looks like Cam Newton's run with the Panthers has come to an end because the Panthers, based on multiple reports here in the last few moments, on the verge of signing Teddy Bridgewater, most recently the backup to Drew Brees there in New Orleans. Teddy, of course, was a starter for the Minnesota Vikings, had that horrific knee injury in practice some years ago, managed to get all the way back, put himself in a position now where it looks like Joe Brady, as we know, last year with the LSU Tigers, and before that, a quality control support staffer for the New Orleans Saints, where he had interaction with Teddy Bridgewater. So there you go. There's your dots being connected in Carolina with the potential for Teddy Bridgewater now to take over from Cam Newton as the starter of the Carolina Panthers. Phillip Rivers, it seems, trending toward an ultimate landing spot in Indianapolis as the successor, I guess you could say, to Andrew Luck. You pretty much had that full 2019 season without Andrew Luck, but it looks like Phillip Rivers could be a Colt here in the very near future. Going to head to our final break. When we come back, we'll put a wrap on a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 100.9 FM right after this.
The flagship station for Alabama Crimson Tide football.
Alabama touchdown.
Only on Tide 100.9 and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app.
Back to put a wrap on a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on Tide 100.9 FM. Travis Reier from BamaOnline.com with you each and every weekday morning from 11 a.m. until noon. Was just talking with Josh Smith during the break, man, how far-reaching this pandemic really is and how much it's impacting our families and the day-to-day life of those that we're close to. I can tell you, our oldest, Evan, the sports writer up there in Butte, Montana at the Montana Standard, he is currently in a 2-week quarantine for the simple fact that last weekend he covered the Montana high school boys and girls state basketball tournament. Part of that was contested there in Butte. And it turns out that the event that he was covering, there was an attendee that ultimately tested positive for COVID-19. And so with that, his place of employment, the Montana Standard, said, well, 2-week quarantine for you. So it's impacting a lot of us, you know, and just seeing on social media this morning, Church of Highlands over in the Birmingham area was offering free testing. They anticipated 500 people showing up to be tested. They got 2,000. They've already had to shut it down this morning over in Birmingham at the Church of Highlands. Crazy. Crazy stuff, you guys. And again, we certainly encourage you to take every precaution you possibly can. Understanding that, look, it may not impact you yourself personally. You may never feel the effects of this, but you just don't know how much your interaction, your inclusion in gatherings of large groups of people, how that can impact, you know, who knows, countless numbers of people that you're not even aware of. That's the great uncertainty with all this. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of Southern Fried Sports. Thanks to Brent Beaird. Thanks to Josh Smith. Thanks to you for listening. Until 11 a.m. on Wednesday. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.